Hello, and welcome back to Politigood. I'm Rachel Parker.
And I'm Tim Fullerton.
And Tim, we have a really interesting guest today. We have somebody from the deep state. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, the state is not that deep. Not anymore. So what I would really like for you to do is I would very much like you to introduce the guest that we have with us today, which is a real privilege. I'm very excited about this conversation, even if it's going to be a tough one to hear. Talk about why you think it's important that we're having this conversation, and then you guys can kick us off. Yeah?
Great. Well, I am very excited to welcome my old colleague from my days at the Interior Department, the former director of the National Park Service, Jon Jarvis, is joining us today. I had the honor of, I should say, probably working for, not working with, John and his team when I was there under Ken Salazar and Sally Jewell, and I wanted to have Jon on because of all the things that are happening in the National Park Service at the moment that I think people really need to know about. There's just been a ton of information out there about things that are happening across the government, and as we talked about in an earlier episode, like, the way to sort of navigate through this is to focus on a couple of issues that you really care about and dive into them rather than trying to learn everything about everything. So I know a little bit about this topic, and our guest knows a ton about it. So I just want to welcome Jon to the Politigood podcast today.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks, Rachel. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here, and I'm happy to talk about what's happening to the National Park Service. So I served 40 years with the National Park Service. I came up through the ranks, starting on the National Mall as an interpretive ranger, and then worked my way up through the system as a park ranger, as a firefighter, as a EMT. I was a park superintendent. I worked in Alaska. And then in 2009, I became the director of the National Park Service, nominated by President Obama and confirmed by the Senate, and served for both of his terms and retired in 2016. So the Park Service was really started in 1872 with the establishment of Yellowstone National Park. Yosemite would argue they got first by Abraham Lincoln. In 1864, he set aside what today is Yosemite National Park, but he gave it to the state of California. He didn't give it to the federal government. But you think about that, Lincoln did that during the Civil War, in thinking that the nation would need something like this, and these places needed to be preserved. So you take that concept of a piece of American landscape, Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, and they began to aggregate them together into a system. In 1916, Congress passed what we call the Organic Act that established the National Park Service, which is the federal agency as a part of the Department of Interior as the stewards of these places. And since that time, since 1916 to 2016, which was our centennial, which Tim, you were involved in, celebrating that, the system has grown to over 400 park units. And that's big natural areas like the Everglades or Rocky Mountain National Park or Mount Rainier. We range parks from the Virgin Islands all the way out to Guam and American Samoa. So every state of the union has at least one of these park units. And they're when FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, was president, he took all of the historic battlefields in the U.S., the Civil War, Revolutionary War battlefields, which were being managed by the War Department, and gave them to the Park Service. So in a way, the Park Service is the steward of America's most important cultural and historical sites, everything from presidential homes to battlefields to places of civil rights like the Ebenezer Baptist Church that was the home church of Dr. Martin Luther King, to these very large natural areas. The budget's about $3 billion, just a little bit over that in terms of federal dollars. We have about 15,000 employees. That has been in decline for almost a decade, from about 20,000. And we host in last year, it was 330 million visitors. To put that in perspective, that's more than all of Disney, National Football, National Baseball, National Basketball, soccer, and NASCAR combined. And the National Park Service is recognized and beloved by the American people. It generates enormous economic benefits. Now, think about this. This is an agency that is distributed across the country. So individual parks with their staffs working in communities to tell a story, to host the visitors. And those gateway communities benefit from that. They have restaurants and souvenir sales and guides and outfitters. So every dollar that comes from the federal government that is invested in the national parks results in at least $4 to the local economy and $10 to the national economy. We host about 60 million international visitors to the national parks each year. That's new money. That's people coming from China and from Europe and around the world to visit these places. The national parks are at the top of the list. There's Las Vegas, and then there's the national parks, when they come to America or New York. And so they're enormous generators of local economy. And these gateway communities really, really benefit from this. And we are anticipating another, banner year coming up this year with park visitation.
So, John, it's really, I don't think most Americans know this. The fact that, you said that for every dollar that is spent, 4 goes back into the local community and 10 goes into the national economy. So this is, as far as return on investment is concerned, this is one of the best bets that we could possibly make. It's basically billions and billions of dollars generated for I would argue, very little investment. So, we've obviously been seeing over the last 2 months a lot of talk about cutting government across the board. And unfortunately, the National Park Service is also one of those departments that the Trump administration has been looking at for making cuts. I'd love to hear your perspective on what you have been hearing and what you have been seeing, and what this is actually going to mean for our national parks and for the visitors who are going to be coming in, like hundreds of millions will be visiting this year.
So I would characterize it as the most devastating and damaging sort of policy approach to the National Park Service in its entire history. And I served, under Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush and Daddy Bush and Carter. And I've been around a long time. And I'm a bit of a student of history. I know what, during World War II, the parks were closed. But they weren't destroyed in that process. They were just shuttered. The systematic firing now of about 1,000 employees in the National Park Service. I mentioned that we have about 14,000 total employees. So fired 1,000. They have another approximately 700 have taken the deferred resignation, which we'll see if that actually plays out. And now they've got a RIF underway, a reduction in force. In each agency has been directed to come forward with about a 10% reduction in workforce as well. So it's not like the Park Service is an agency where everybody's working in Washington. Of the 14, there are 300 people in Washington out of our entire agency. The rest are in the field. And if you think about 400 parks, in many cases, you're talking about a small park. And I'll give you a couple of examples because we've been tracking some of this stuff. So Fort Vancouver National Historic Park, which is in the right on the Columbia River in Oregon, and it has a staff of 19 employees, 19 Park Service employees. 5 of those have been fired.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so Carlsbad Caverns. Carlsbad Caverns was a very, very popular area of Texas. Gets lots of folks go there. It has a staff of 50. 14 have been fired. That's 25% have been fired. You go down the list and, 10%, 15%, 20% of the staff have been fired. And then another number, which we don't have the data on yet because they're keeping it secret, are the ones that have taken the deferred retirements. So it's not like a strategic reduction. It's a haphazard, meat axe approach to reducing numbers. And the net effect is going to be felt in each of these parks. Now, if you're a Yosemite, and I think I don't know how many Yosemite. I'll give you like Grand Canyon. So Grand Canyon has 150 employees, and they've lost 10. Okay, so they could probably, deal with it. But if you've got 15 employees and you've lost 5, you're going to have to completely change your operation. You're going to have to close the visitor center. You're going to have to cut back on your hours. There'll be fewer programs, and there may be some specific function that's just gone. That's the other thing to think about. If you're running a national park, which I have done, it's like running a city, except that your population turns over every couple days. But you do everything. You do law enforcement, search and rescue, firefighting, both wildland and structural. You do primary power, water, trash pickup, all the maintenance, every function that a city does. A park is also, they're doing planning, they're doing construction, they're doing maintenance, they're doing patrol. And so if you randomly just eliminate 20% of that staff, if your wastewater treatment plant operator is gone, you don't have water.
Right. Well, John, I actually heard a story, and maybe you can confirm or not, but I think there was a story about one of the parks where they literally couldn't actually open the park because the person that had the key for the front gate had been let go in that initial wave, and so they literally couldn't open the park because the maintenance guy with the key no longer worked there anymore.
Yeah, I mean that's the locksmith at Yosemite, and that particular function. It's not just the front door, it's all the keys, it's everything. And, in a park that hosts, some 4 million visitors a year, you have facilities that are closed up and locked up and, and you need a locksmith. And it's not like you can look in the yellow pages and just get one locally, because usually these parks tend to be quite rural and the services aren't readily available. So I think there's going to be significant effect on the visitation this summer. They're going to be going to parks that are going to have places closed, sections of the park, roads, trails. Trails will not be maintained. Toilets will be dirty. Trash will not get picked up. And the other thing to think about it is visitor safety. So the sort of model of the national parks is we don't keep you from doing something dangerous. What we try to do is to educate you on how to experience the national parks in a safe way. It's not like all the bison in Yellowstone are behind a fence. They're right there with you. And so we put rangers out there to say, don't go over and try to pat the nice bison on the top of the head. That's really not very smart. Keep your distance. There are no guardrails on the edge of the Grand Canyon. You can walk right out to the edge. But the model is you have rangers that are there. Well, you take away those rangers, and unfortunately, it will result in, I think, greater numbers of accidents, injuries, and death in the national parks.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing that most people don't really realize. These places are kept pristine for a reason, and because we are trying to leave as little of a footprint as possible. So you're right. And I will say, and I see this all the time, and I think of you and the team when I see people trying to take selfies with bison. Please don't do that. Please do not do that. It will not end well for you, and it will strain resources to deal with you. But I remember, so I was in at the Interior Department during 2013 when the shutdown happened for the month or 6 weeks or whatever it was. And I remember being in the office and having Republican members, because they were the ones that shut the government down, calling and saying, well, we'll just have the sheriffs keep those parks open in our local areas because they knew that it was a PR battle they were going to lose. But the reality, I mean, you guys did not allow them to do that because they don't know the terrain, and then you'd probably end up having to go get them too. So it's really important for people to know, like, they're kept wild for a reason, but you have these amazing park rangers who know everything about these places stationed there, which just also keep you safe and enhance the process, or enhance the experience, of being there. So from your perspective, I think we know the answer, but I want to hear you say it definitively. These cuts, will they actually save money for America, or will we end up losing money because of these cuts?
I think you're going to lose money. So think about this. The Park Service collects fees. So when you go to Yosemite or Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon, there's someone in that fee booth that is collecting either an entrance fee or selling you a America the Beautiful pass or a senior pass or something like that. Park Service collects about $350 million a year in those fees. Also, our concessioners. So these are the hotels, food and beverage guides and outfitters that operate in the parks, the Aramarks and Xanterra and others that operate these hotels. That's a private sector business. They operate under contract with the National Park Service. And they pay the Park Service a franchise fee, roughly $100 million, but it's based on occupancy and gross revenues. So if you start getting really bad Yelp reviews and people changing their minds, I mean, my next door neighbor here who knows I'm the former director and is constantly getting advice on where to go with her family on, what park, when, how. She said, well, I'm hearing really bad things. This year we probably won't go. And that's a snippet, but still, I think you go across the country and you start hearing about this, there is going to be a decline in visitation, which translates into decline in local businesses, it declines in tax base, it declines in fees. So I think it's going to be a net negative on a lot of spreadsheets.
Yeah, I think... Oh, go ahead, Rachel. Can I ask a quick question?
Sorry, no. So I, many years ago, we took a family trip down the Grand Canyon, down the Colorado River.
Great.
And I'm thinking about how dangerous that really could potentially be. So like you just said, this is a rafting outfit that operates by permit with the federal government to take people down these trips. The waiting list is extensive because they only give contracts to organizations that have the right kind of training, the right kind of rafts, the right kind of boats. They're complicated, weird. If anybody's ever seen them, they're designed to be able to take 20 people down a class, whatever, rapid and not die. It's not a kayak. It's a big thing. And I was just thinking about the liability for a company like that now if search and rescue has suddenly suffered pretty severe cuts, because people can get hurt even if they don't, if they're obeying all the rules inside the boat and they're not doing anything stupid or reckless and they're not drunk and things like that, because they'll leave you. That's one thing too. Like if you're being disruptive, they'll be like, we will leave you in the desert and somebody will come get you. But if you could talk a little bit about the potential liability exposure for these companies that have previously just been operating under this like very sort of secure and sort of normalized relationship with the federal government. And if I operated one of those, I would suddenly think, well, if I don't have the assurance that there will be a helicopter that shows up to take someone to the hospital, and you can extrapolate this across the entire park system. I've also been to Glacier Park. People hike those glaciers. That's potentially very dangerous. So if you could talk a little bit about like what is the appetite going to be during a tourist season? First of all, like you just said, where people may just not go because it's not worth the risk. But let's just say that you already have that reservation. You already go. This is a dream come true. You waited for 2 years to be able to take your family down what is one of the most unbelievable experiences that I've ever had in my life. There's nothing like it. And talk a little bit about how those relationships work and like what the potential. I mean, beyond the financial liability, just nobody wants to see someone get injured on their watch, let alone with knowing that there's no way that they can guarantee their safety.
That's a really good point, Rachel. So So you think about places like the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River, Mount Rainier National Park, where if you're going to climb in the Himalayas, you're an American climber, you go to Rainier first to train. Yeah. And in each of these parks, you get the Tetons, to do the grand, Yosemite to do the big walls, the most classic climbs in the world in Yosemite. There is a corps of rangers that have the responsibilities to ensure that we let people do these things, that this is important, that it's an opportunity to have an adventure, a lifetime adventure, but we want you to do it safely. So we spend a lot of time working with the public and with our guides to execute these in a very safe manner. Boat inspections, safety gear on board, all of those kinds of things. Coast Guard's not coming. We're doing that work. That's ranger work. We make sure that the oarsmen know what they're doing. They've been down the river. They've been through lava. They know. They do practice runs, and we go with them. And then if somebody gets into trouble, then our rangers are trained, prepared, practiced to go in and get you out. I mean, and they, you think about, it's usually the worst conditions when somebody gets in trouble. That's when we go in. When everybody else is coming out, our rangers go in. And what's interesting about, this way that the Trump administration has characterized our public servants as unproductive and not meeting the standards, and their performance
parasites. They've called them parasites.
Yeah, which is such horseshit. I mean, it's just amazing to me that most of our rangers that are in these jobs, they dedicate their time, even their days off. They go off and get specialized training on their own, so that they are prepared and they travel with their packs, so they are ready to go in an instant. And often they may have a very unusual job, but they have this other set of skills. One of my favorites was at Mount Rainier National Park. If you're going to climb, I was superintendent, so I know Rainier really well, and I've climbed it a couple of times. At 10,000 feet on the mountain is your base camp. That's where you go up to on the first day. You spend the night, and then you do your summit bid on the next couple days. But at 10,000 feet, there's a toilet. Okay, and that obviously we need a toilet at that 10,000 feet. One of the Mount Rainier employees cleans that toilet. Okay, he is a maintenance guy. He works for the maintenance crew, and his job is to keep that toilet clean. But he's also one of the world's best climbers. He's climbed Everest. And so when there's a search and rescue, he puts on his gear and he goes and saves people's lives.
You want that guy going to save you, right?
That's right. Right. And when he's not saving somebody, he's cleaning the toilet. So it's like you can't look that up in the yellow pages and say, I want one of those in the private sector.
Yeah, I mean, like for folks that don't know, I recommend like doing some deep dives on what some of the jobs are that Park Service people do. I mean, like they are some of the most amazing people. They stay in these jobs forever because they love them so much and they provide such value. It is. I highly recommend you talk. If you know somebody or you go to a park, you should talk to these people because I think. Oh, go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, the 1,000 people that they fired were in their probationary period, right? So they were in their 1 year, maybe 2 year period. Almost all of those employees had worked as a seasonal temporary employee for years, 5, 6, 7 years. So they already had built up an enormous skill set and knowledge base about the park. And then they finally were breaking in. They're finally getting into a career path with a permanent employee that would have life insurance and retirement and all of those things, and then they get fired. So you think about the irony of that, and you're wiping out a highly skilled set of potential new, young, and potentially diverse employees that were coming into the service.
Yep. And I want to touch on that a little bit because one of the things is that most or many of the parks are in very conservative, very rural areas for one, very rural, right? But the nature of what they are. So they tend to be conservative and tend to be run, or Republicans tend to be their House members or their senators. I mean, Wyoming, Idaho, all of these places, right? They're deeply, deeply red. Have you heard any reaction to some of this? Because I will say, like, I mean, obviously the Park Service can be a political punching bag on both sides, right? But generally speaking, most people agree that the Park Service is a great idea and that we should support it. And when we were, you know, when I was in Interior, I remember the secretaries would come with you and the superintendents, and then a lot of Republican members would come as well. Are you hearing from them? Is this one of those like F around and find out things that like people don't really realize? Because like it is going to cause a tremendous amount of harm to these rural areas.
Yeah. So, for instance, my first park superintendency was Craters of the Moon in Idaho. Okay, so that's rural Idaho. Very, very conservative. That's Mike Simpson's district, who happens to be the chairman of Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. And I saw Mike last year. I went to Craters for its 100th anniversary, and a great celebration of its value to the local community of Arco, Idaho. And at that point, you know, things weren't blowing up like they were. This was actually before the election. And I've tried to reach out to Mike because I know him, because I testified before him many times. And he's a park supporter. He gets it. But, you know, I think that the Republicans are just scared shitless. They just are, they're afraid to raise an issue. And, you know, I've always felt the Park Service had supports on both sides of the aisle up there. And I never leaned one side or the other. I always worked at both. And you know, I used to joke about going up to meet a new member of Congress when they were, you know, fresh in and they were sort of self-identified, maybe as a Tea Party or whatever. And I'd go in, you know, to just meet them and I didn't have anything I wanted to ask them. I just wanted to say, hi, I'm the director of the National Park Service, and there's a park in your district. And they're like, Park Service? You're the director of the Park Service? And they were like, staff, would you step out just for a minute? And they go, would you sign my pass? and then they would, you know, the next day you're in a hearing and they're beating the crap out of you. So I called them the closet park supporters up there. They behind the scenes, they'll be very supportive. And, you know, talking about the economics, you probably remember this, Tim, but every year when we announced our visitation, we would break that down into the economic impact by congressional district, by park. And we would deliver that. I'd be a little packet and I'd go in and meet, you know, congressman or whoever or senator or whoever. Here's the economic impact of your parks in your district and the number of businesses in the communities that are supportive. And I think the Democrats have always been terrible at making that argument. They don't make the economic argument very well, but it resonates. And I think that my belief at this moment in time that you know, all the fired rangers that are happening, that's terrible. But as one park superintendent said, they're feeding on our tears. So what we need, I believe, is that the gateway communities that are in these rural districts and the businesses that live and die on a 3 or 4 month season at their local national park or park unit need to speak up, and they need to call their member, and they need to say, hey, this is going to impact me, and not just this year, but next year and the year after. If people really start doing something else, I was going to go to the Grand Canyon, but I'm going to go to Miami instead, then that's a problem. That's a real problem.
Yeah, I think that we are sitting on an economic time bomb, to be perfectly honest. Because right now, obviously there's visitation now, but this is not peak season. Come, April and May, it is going to be really interesting to see what happens. And I think, like you pointed out, in some of these districts, like losing well-paid, high-quality jobs is going to be devastating. They don't have a lot of these. And then it will have that sort of spiraling effect of, oh, well, someone goes back to their home and is like, wow, there's trash everywhere, or there was this, things weren't picked up and less people come. Internationally, I think regardless of honestly what happened with the parks, we're going to see less people visiting this summer due to all of the chaos that I think has happened, but it will spill over to the parks as well. And you could lay off every single person at the National Park Service and still not save money. Like, you would still lose money from the economic perspective. It's like you said, 10 to 1 at the federal level and 4 to 1 locally. And I don't know how some of these members, like you said, they're scared, and I agree with you 100%. In some instances, literally scared for their safety, not just for their seats. Like, we have to be real about that.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a rude awakening this summer. And like you said, I hope people, especially if you have a national park or national monument or historical site in your district, especially if you have a Republican member calling them and saying, what are you doing to make sure that these places are protected and also continue to be economic engines? Because I will agree with you, John, we did not do a good job of portraying that. Like, that was one of the things that our office obviously talked a lot about, but we needed to be screaming it louder. Like, we had the president's initiative on travel and tourism, which was good, but there still needed to be, which Ken Salazar led for one. You were very involved. I was involved on the recreation.gov side with the great team that you guys had. But yeah, people have to call their members, both their House members and their senators, because this is, like I said, I think it's a time bomb, and people are not going to be happy when they see the results.
Can I ask you another question? So,
Sure.
One decidedly conservative lobbying group in the United States is the Chamber of Commerce. And each Chamber of Commerce has a state chapter and usually a local chapter. And while you're representative, my assumption is that the Chamber of Commerce should be a fairly good resource for people if they want to know what the economic impact of a park in their congressional district and in their state is. Can you talk a little bit about where people might be able to look online? You can speak very broadly, it's fine. About, like, we're talking about where the receipts are, right? Like, to use a current sort of an online joke is like, where, show me the receipts. Where can people find that information? Because I think that as much as I'd like to believe that if you call your member of Congress, they might actually pay attention, I think that everybody on both sides of the aisle have been knocked completely sideways by how swiftly, even though this is exactly what they said they were going to do, this is like the Project 2025 blueprint. It was literally written down. I don't know why everyone's so shocked, or at least they're pretending to be shocked, or, well, he said he was going to do it, but he says he's going to do a lot of things, and then he doesn't do them, and half the time he's just blustering. But no, here we are. We are in the find out phase, like you said earlier, Tim. So, John, if you could, my recommendation is that if you're in a local red district, that you call the Chamber of Commerce and you lean on them very, very hard, because this should be something that is a layup for them. But if you could talk a little bit about where people can go locally just to learn about how much income a park brings to their state, to their district, to their community, whatever.
Yeah, so that's a good question. A couple things. The Chamber of Commerce is one, I think, certainly statewide. Also, the state tourism organization. There's usually a organization, built into the state government, perhaps working directly for the governor, that is focused on bringing tourists to their state. Because, think about that. That's money coming from some other part of the country coming into your community, and that's different than like a manufacturing type of money. The Bureau of Economic Statistics. Tim, if you remember, we worked with them to break out the recreation economy as well, to be able to show that, because it had been sort of lumped in with some of the other factors. And then on the Park Service website, If you do a little searching, there is at least there was. We'll see if it's still there. What we call the money generation model, and it is a solid, scholarly developed economic model that takes visitation at individual parks and translates that into a direct economy. And you can look up park by park, year by year, aggregated into statewide down to the individual unit of the actual economic effects. And I'm betting that they're not putting that up for 2023, so you'd have to go back to 2022 or 2021 or others to look at that. But those have all been in the 320 million visitors anyway, so I think that all of those would be easy. The other is if you're local, is to talk to your park superintendent. They will have the statistics, they will have them in hand for how many visits they got this year and last few years and what that economic impact. We have at least trained most of our park superintendents to be able to be articulate about the economic effects to their local communities.
Cool. Well, and if people want to check it out, it's at nps.gov. You can let us know if that information is still up there or not. But anyways, well, Jon, I want to thank you. We've basically have run out of time here. This has been a hugely important conversation, and I think a lot of people who support the parks don't even understand all of the benefits that they bring. So I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation today. It's great to see you after all these years, Jon. And I remembered, I'm going to tell a little quick story, which I don't know if you remember this or not, but John's mustache used to have a Twitter account that a fan started for him, along with Ken Salazar's bolo, because he used to wear a bolo tie. So when I first started, people kept coming to me about, like, who's running this Jarvis's mustache and Ken's bolo? And
occasionally those two got together.
They did. I thought they were Republicans at one point, but then they were saying favorable stuff. I never figured. I had some good ideas, but anyways, it was one of my most favorite jobs, was working at Interior and working with you in the Park Service and learning everything. So I want to thank you, Jon. Everybody, go visit your national park and make sure that we push back on some of these cuts. Until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Rachel.
Today's episode was produced by Rachel Parker and Tim Fullerton. Audio, music, and engineering by Chris Lombardo. Our assistant producer is Lizette Nolasco. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts and watch entire episodes on our YouTube channel. Sign up for premium content and more at politigoodpod.com or email us at hello@politigoodpod.com.